So this may be a little anticlimactic for you. I wasn't really planning to talk about these articles because I imagine that you can read them. And if you can't read them, I'll just warn you that they're on the exam. The reading packet's always on the exam. So the thing about the beaver and the wolf we've already talked about in class. Large marine vertebrates that were historically over fish is kind of an interesting detail. Again, more predator regulation stuff. Sea turtles, sea otters we've talked about in class. The oysters are a really interesting one. Headwater salamanders, a key link in carrying the nutrients from, energy content from the bugs up to the bigger critters. Headwater salamanders are surprisingly important in food webs. Who would have thought? It's one of those little links that carries a ton of energy uphill to the higher consumers. Horseshoe crabs, really interesting. I have a neat video to show, but it doesn't fit in the school this year. The predators in Lake Guri are kind of cool. The hammerheads are cool. The other sharks, you've already heard, predator effect. I'll warn you that the cartoon section has a few helpful things to review nutrient cycles. Number 24 is super interesting. The CO2 that we have in the air is making our oceans more acidic. Technically, the pH number hasn't changed that much, but in your body, if you change by 3 decimals, you're already having functional problems. The ocean has changed by 2 decimals. It has changed by 0.02 pH points. And apparently that's a really big whoop. The ocean is supposed to be basic. All life on Earth has evolved to have a very specific pH range. Because as climate changes, things go all interesting, cattywampus, but something that doesn't usually happen is the pH of the ocean doesn't usually change, excuse me. pH of the ocean doesn't usually change. So pretty much everything in there has kind of evolved to depend on a certain specific pH. And there are little regional differences. Excuse me. But as humans have added CO2 to the atmosphere, the oceans become more acidic, and that's actually making some really big, interesting changes to the ocean. I'll also point out, if you don't mind, that a lot of that first research was done right here in our own backyard at UCS Brodog. We live in a super historic, really critical environmental science hotspot. And so some of the first ocean acidification research was done here. As the ocean becomes more acidic, something that might matter to you is it's harder to build calcium carbonate shells. That's a basic compound. So if the ocean's more acidic, it's hard to make those shells. And we like to eat things that make shells. We like to eat lobsters and crabs. We like to eat bivalves like clams and scallops and oysters. And so in Santa Barbara, it seems that our ocean doesn't really reflect the global trend that much. We have a lot of mixing of water, so we're not really that messed up. But in shallow bodies of water, places where we often farm oysters in big, open, low elevation bays, those places are getting really difficult to grow oysters in. So that affects our human food supply. It's kind of an interesting one. And man, fish and whales. You might remember I talked about ladies and carbonate and calcium in the gut. They combine. So apparently the gut activity of large fish and whales bonds calcium to carbonate ions, and that gets pooped out as sand. It appears that fish and whales have a really significant impact on the total amount of carbon that you can pack into the ocean, because fish and whales, when they poop, they drop little bits of calcium carbonate, and that's a rock form of calcium. You might remember, of carbon. You might remember when we talked about the abiotic cycle, that calcium carbonate deposits in the bottom of the ocean. That's how we get limestone and marble. So fish and whales accelerate sinking carbon from water into ocean sediments. In other words, if we had more fish and whales, we might be able to put a lot of our extra carbon back into rocks. And if you don't quite know what I'm talking about, I'm guessing that you can read this article. I'd like everybody to please clear up all of your papers and take out just the study guide. I'll come back in the next video to give you the stars.